Have you ever felt the moment a place stopped being safe? Not a dramatic shift, not a thunderclap or a slammed door, but something quieter and far more sinister, a slow, crawling realization, the way cold water rises around your ankles in the dark before you understand you are already drowning. Have you ever looked at a path you knew by heart and felt the ground beneath a tilt, just slightly, just enough, like the world had quietly rearranged itself while your back was turned and hadn't bothered to tell you? Most people have. Most people have stood in a familiar hallway, or a kitchen they grew up in, or at the edge of a forest road they have ridden 100 times, and felt something ancient and wordless press against the inside of their chest. Not fear exactly, but the older thing that fear is made from. The thing that says, this is not how this goes. This is not how any of this goes. That is where we begin tonight. Not in a haunted house, not in some gothic ruin draped in theatrical shadow. We begin in the ordinary. In the familiar. In the place you thought you knew. Because the most dangerous doors are the ones that look exactly like home. His name was Callum. And he had ridden this trail since he was 11 years old. He knew it the way you know a prayer you learned before you understood the words, not through thought, but through the body, through reflex, through the specific muscle memory of 1,000 mornings. He knew the place where the path bent left around a cluster of silver birches, and how the light fell there in the late afternoon like hammered copper. He knew the low branch over the creek crossing that he always ducked without thinking, in the soft patch of ground near the ridge where the soil stayed wet long after rain. He knew which rocks his horse, Sable, liked to sidestep, and which stretches made her ears prick forward with something that looked almost like joy. He knew this trail. He had measured his life against it, the first time he rode it alone at 13, the morning after his father's funeral at 26 when he couldn't think of anywhere else to go, the slow, quiet rides during the years between then and now, 41 years old, carrying the weight of a life that had given him much and taken more. So when the fog came, he noticed. Not with alarm, at first, but with the mild curiosity of a man who trusts his surroundings. It rolled in from the tree-line to his left, low and thick and moving with a strange deliberateness that real fog does not have. Real fog drifts. It wanders. It follows the cold pockets and the damp hollows with the lazy logic of water finding its level. This fog moved the way a curtain moves when someone on the other side of it is breathing. It had intention. It had direction. And the air inside it smelled of wet earth and something else, something that Callum's brain flagged and then immediately tried to unflag, tried to file away under the category of harmless, of explicable, of you are imagining things. Copper. Old iron. The smell of blood when it has cooled. Sable stopped. She did not slow, did not hesitate, did not dance sideways the way she sometimes did when startled. She stopped. Completely. Absolutely. As if she had walked up against a wall of glass and found it immovable. Her ears moved, not the quick, curious swivel of a horse tracking a sound, but something else, something desperate, turning and turning and turning like small antennae trying to locate the source of a signal that was coming from everywhere at once. Callum sat with her for a moment. He had learned, over 30 years of riding, that horses tell you the truth. Not the convenient truth, not the truth that keeps you comfortable, but the deep truth, the one your own nervous system has already cataloged and your conscious mind is still negotiating. When Sable stopped like this, when her whole body became a single held breath, Callum had learned to listen. He looked ahead. The clearing was wrong. He had never, in 30 years of riding this path, seen a clearing here. The trail ran through dense oak and ash at this point, the canopy closing overhead in a green vault that held the light like stained glass. There should have been no opening, no break, no space. But the fog had retreated around a wide circle of bare earth, and in the center of that circle, vast and ancient and impossible, stood an oak tree he had never seen before. It was enormous. Its trunk was wider than his arm span by 3 times over, and its bark had the deep, ridged texture of something that had been growing since before anyone living had drawn their first breath. Its branches spread wide and low and gnarled, reaching outward like arms that had forgotten how to let go. And it was draped in white. Long pale ribbons hung from every branch, still and vertical, not moving in any breeze. They caught the ambient gray light of the fog and gave it back as a faint, milky luminescence. He counted them. He didn't know why he started counting, but he did, the way you count things when your brain is stalling, when it needs the simple arithmetic of 1 and 2 and 3 to keep from thinking about the larger, formless thing it has already understood. He stopped counting at 22. There were more. He reached for his compass. It was an old one, brass, a gift from his father with his father's initials scratched on the back, EM, in handwriting that still, even now, made something in Callum's throat go tight. He held it flat in his palm and looked down at the needle. It was spinning. Not wildly, not like a toy gone wrong, but with a strange, measured rhythm, as if it were searching. As if it were trying to remember something it had always known and could no longer locate. He looked back up. The trees behind him were gone. Not hidden by fog. Gone. In their place, extending as far as he could see in every direction except toward the clearing, was a wall of gray thorns. Dense and architectural, woven together with the kind of patient complexity that takes decades to accumulate. He turned in the saddle, a full slow circle, and confirmed it. Forward was the clearing, the oak, the ribbons. In every other direction, there was only the wall. No path out. No path back. The trail he had ridden 100 times had been erased. He was aware, in a clinical, dissociated way, that he should be afraid. He was aware that what he was seeing was not possible, and that the impossibility of it should be producing panic, should be flooding his body with the kind of adrenaline that makes men shout or run or do something sharp and immediate. But what he actually felt was much quieter than that. What he felt was the particular stillness of a person who has come to the end of something and is standing in the last moment before they understand what comes next. He recognized this feeling. He had felt it in a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning. He had felt it holding a phone that had just gone silent. He had felt it standing in the doorway of a room that used to belong to someone who was no longer there. This was not terror. This was recognition. Then the drumming began. It rose through the soles of his boots, through Sable's body beneath him, through his own bones, a low, rhythmic vibration, like something tapping from the other side of a hollow surface. Not percussion exactly, not music. Something older. The sound of fingers on wood, patient and unrelenting, 1,000 small repetitions building into a single massive pulse. Sable groaned beneath him, a sound he had never heard a horse make, low and sustained and full of something that was almost language, and he felt her shifting, felt the ground beneath her hooves give, not all at once but slowly, in the way that only water gives, the soil becoming liquid, accommodating her weight and then consuming it. He should have jumped. He knows that now. Every human instinct was screaming it. But he didn't. He looked up at the oak. The ribbons were moving. Not in wind. Not in any current he could feel or name. They were moving on their own, each one swaying with a slow, individual rhythm, as if each were breathing separately. And as the light shifted, as the fog thickened around the base of the tree and thinned near its crown, he saw them clearly for the first time. Not cloth. Not silk, not linen, not any woven thing. Long pale strips, each one slightly translucent, each one marked with a texture that was almost topographical, ridged, creased, patterned in the specific irregular geometry of something organic. Human skin. He understood it slowly, the way you understand the image in a trick picture, the moment where the old woman becomes the young girl, and then you can't unsee it, and then the young girl is gone forever and only the old woman remains. He understood it, and his mind tried to take it back, tried to reclassify the ribbons as cloth, as fabric, as something that made sense and fit inside the category of the world he knew. But the reclassification failed. His mind couldn't hold the lie. The ribbons were skin. And then, the faces. They appeared slowly, which was somehow worse than if they had appeared all at once. They peeled away from the bark of the surrounding trees with the gradual deliberateness of someone removing a mask after a very long time of wearing it. Pale. Elongated. Features compressed and stretched by years of bark growing around them, of wood absorbing them, of the slow patient pressure of a living thing incorporating them. Eyes that were too wide. Mouths that had been open for too long. Faces that no longer remembered what expression they had been making when they stopped. Callum counted 12. He stopped at 12. He looked at each one in turn, the way you look at photographs in a house you don't know, looking for someone familiar, for some face you can name. And that was when it happened, the thing that unmade him quietly, that reached past the horror and the impossibility and touched something that was purely and simply human. He recognized one. The third from the left. High in the trunk of a pale ash tree at the clearing's edge. Older than he remembered, compressed by time and wood and whatever process had brought it here, but unmistakably, the face of his father. Edward Merrick. Dan 11 years. Buried in the churchyard at Hartfield, beneath a stone with his initials carved into it, EM, the same letters scratched into the back of the compass now spinning uselessly in Callum's hand. His father's face looked at him from the bark of the tree. His father's face was calm. And if you have ever lost someone, truly lost them, not the clean, narrative loss of storybooks but the real loss, the one that leaves a shape in the air where a person used to stand, then you know what Callum felt in that moment. You know it isn't simply grief. It is something more complicated and more helpless than grief. It is the terrible, unwanted hope. The hope that comes after you thought you had finished hoping. The hope that whispers, what if this is something other than an ending? What if the ending is a door, and the door is still open, and you are standing in front of it? If this moment feels familiar to you, you are not alone. There are so many of us who have stood in front of that door, who have felt the specific ache of a love that has nowhere left to go. You are part of something quiet and real here, a family of people who understand that grief is not the end of feeling but the deepest kind of it. If this story is finding something in you, let it. Like this video, leave a comment, and stay. You are not walking this alone. You never were. Sable had sunk to her knees. The soil was at her chest, and she was still, no longer panicking, no longer groaning. She was simply waiting, in the way that animals sometimes do, with a complete impatient acceptance of what is happening that human beings spend entire lifetimes trying to learn and almost never manage. Callum looked at his father's face and said nothing. He had rehearsed this conversation 10,000 times. In the car, at night, on the trail, in the gray half-sleep of 3 in the morning when the losses pile up and the mind tries to sort through them and can't. He had said everything he needed to say in 100 imaginary rooms, to a face he was slowly forgetting the exact texture of, the exact weight of. He had apologized, and he had asked forgiveness, and he had listed all the things left undone and unsaid. And he had said the things that he should have said when there was still a person present to receive them. And now the face was here, in front of him, and he had nothing. He was empty. He was terribly, surprisingly, cleanly empty. His father's compressed features shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way faces move in nightmares. Something small. Something around the eyes. Something that Callum had only ever seen his father's face do once, when Callum was 7 years old and had fallen from this very trail and come home with a broken wrist, and his father had looked at him with an expression that was not anger and was not simple worry but was the particular face of a person who loves someone so much that the thought of that person being hurt is genuinely unbearable to them. His father looked at him with that face. And Callum understood, not in words, not in language, not in any form that he could have transcribed or transmitted, but understood completely in with his whole body. His father was not here because something had gone wrong. His father was not trapped. The faces in the bark were not suffering. The woods were not hungry for him, not consuming him, not building a cage around him from the material of his grief. The woods were full of the people who had loved this place. Full of what is left of people when the people are gone, not ghosts, not remains, but the presence they leave and the things they touched. The stories they told to the trees. The mornings they spent in the silence of the path. All the living they did in proximity to this ground, and how the ground remembers, and how the ground holds what it is given, long after the givers have gone somewhere else. The woods were not digesting him. They were showing him what they kept. The soil released sable. It happened as quietly as it had begun, a slow, generous unhanding, the earth restoring itself to earth, the ground becoming solid beneath her again. She stood. She shook herself once, a long shudder that ran from her neck to her tail, and then she was still, and she was calm, and her ears had stopped their frantic searching and were simply pointed forward, relaxed, toward the oak tree in the center of the clearing. Callum looked at his father one more time. His father's face had gone still again, absorbed back into the subtle undulations of bark, present if you looked for it and nearly invisible if you didn't. The way grief works in a body. The way the dead live in the living, not loudly, not obviously, but there. Woven in. Part of the texture of the thing you are. He put the compass back in his pocket. The needle, when he checked it, was still. It was pointing north. The fog began to pull back. Slowly, from the path ahead, drawing itself into the tree line with the same deliberateness with which it had come, and as it cleared, he saw the birches, the proper birches, the ones he knew, their silver bark catching the late light. He saw the bend in the trail. He saw the low branch over the creek crossing, right where it had always been. He sat for a moment longer. There are moments in a life that you know, even as they are happening, that you will not be able to explain. Not because they are unexplainable, but because the language for them doesn't exist yet, and maybe never will, and the attempt to translate them into words will only diminish them, the way a photograph of something vast and alive always looks smaller than the thing itself. This was one of those moments. Callum understood that he would carry this without being able to share it. He understood that this was not a loss. Some things are only for you. He rode home through the familiar trees, and the light was what it always was, and the path was what it always was, and the sound of Sable's hooves on the earth was the sound they had always made, steady, and real, and alive. He passed the silver birches. He ducked a low branch without thinking. He crossed the creek, and at no point did he feel the need to look back. Not because what was behind him didn't matter. Not because the faces in the bark, and the white ribbons swaying in an unfelt wind, and his father's eyes looking at him across the impossible clearing hadn't been real. But because he understood, now, the thing he had spent 11 years not understanding. The dead don't need you to look back at them. They are not behind you. They are not ahead of you. They are in the place where the trail bends, where you duck without thinking, where the familiar ground holds the memory of every time you have ever passed this way. They are in the compass that still points north. They are in the muscle memory of a path ridden 100 times. They are in the way the light falls in the late afternoon like hammered copper, beautiful and brief in yours. The woods were full. And Callum rode through them, and was part of them, and was, for the first time in 11 years, not lost. He was home. If this journey touched a part of you, if you have ever stood at the edge of a clearing that shouldn't have been there, in some private geography of your own, and felt the ground shift under everything you thought you knew, leave your story in the comments. We read everyone. This is a sanctuary for people who remember, for people who carry what they cannot say out loud, for people who know that the most important things in a life happen in the quiet moments on familiar paths. Subscribe and stay with us. We will keep the light on. We will keep walking. You are not alone in the woods.